I never thought the same hands that once trembled holding my newborn son on the night of my very first jazz performance would one day grab my collar and throw me down to the cold floor of my own living room. My son, Ethan Barnes, struck me across the face right in front of his fiancée. Blood burst from my nose, sharp and metallic in the air. He shouted, voice hoarse and shaking, "You deserve it, old man. You're a selfish liar, hiding money while I'm drowning." I didn't say a word, not because I was afraid, but because in that moment I could still hear something else, a faint melody coming from the corner of the room. The old upright piano, the one my late wife Elaine used to play, was still whispering through the static of the old speaker. Autumn leaves. And I realized what broke that day wasn't my nose. It was the rhythm of a father's soul. Ethan didn't know that behind my worn clothes and quiet life was a memorial fund, $210,000 Elaine had left behind before she died. A secret I'd protected for 9 years. Not for comfort, not for pride, but because I made her a promise that I would never let that money be used for vanity or greed. It wasn't just a fund. It was her music turned into numbers. And I guarded it like a melody only she and I knew. Before we go on, please subscribe and turn on notifications. We share real stories of justice, dignity, and the quiet kind of revenge that doesn't need to shout. And tell us where you're watching from, because every story finds someone who needs to hear it. My name is Clifford Barnes. I'm 64 years old, a retired jazz musician born and raised right here in Nashville, Tennessee. For 40 years, I played piano in bars and taught music in small classrooms. The stage lights faded for me the day Elaine died in 2016. Cancer. She went quietly the way she lived. After she was gone, I stopped performing. The applause no longer sounded like joy. It sounded like people clapping for someone who didn't exist anymore. So I lived simply in the little wooden house we bought when Ethan was 10. I thought if I worked hard, paid the bills, and kept my word, I'd raise him into a good man. I thought love and silence were enough. But I was wrong. My silence taught him something else entirely, that I would always forgive, and that forgiveness meant weakness. The truth is, silence can be the kindest sound in the world, but in the wrong ears, it's permission. That afternoon, the whole city felt quiet, the kind of stillness that comes before a summer storm. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, drawing faded golden stripes across the walls. The smell of coffee lingered. Then came the sound of tires on gravel. A car pulled into my driveway. When the door opened, Ethan walked in, white shirt tie perfectly straight, carrying the arrogance of youth like a fragrance. Behind him was Madison, his fiancée. Young, polished. The kind of woman who always looks like she's waiting to be impressed. I smiled softly. "It's been a while since you two came by." Madison's eyes moved across the room. The old records on the shelf, the scuffed furniture, the photo of Elaine by the piano. She sighed. "Ethan, I told you we should move him somewhere nicer. This house looks like it's stuck in another decade." Ethan didn't even sit down. He crossed his arms. "Dad, the wedding's coming up. We need some help." How much I asked already, knowing I'd regret the answer. 25,000. I let the number hang in the air for a moment. Then I said quietly, "I can't, son. That money is your mother's memorial fund. I promised her I wouldn't touch it." The air changed. Madison shifted uncomfortable, but her tone stayed composed. "Mr. Barnes, you're alone. You don't need much." "Why hold on to that money when your son's future depends on it?" Ethan snapped. "You have money, Dad. You just don't want to help. You're stingy. You owe me that." I met his gaze, steady even. "No, Ethan. I don't owe you. And your mother didn't leave that money to pay for pride." The house went silent. Only the old speaker played softly in the background, Autumn Leaves, again the trumpet solo, deep and low, like the walls themselves were remembering her. Ethan laughed bitterly. "You talk like a preacher. You don't get it. Nobody respects you without money anymore." I stayed still. Maybe so. But if you lose your rhythm, no amount of applause will make you a musician again. He sneered. "Spare me the lessons, old man." Then in one motion he grabbed a glass of water from the table and threw it at the wall. It shattered. Water and glass scattered across the floor like broken notes. Madison jumped. "Ethan, please don't." But his anger was louder than her voice. He stepped closer. His face twisted a man who thought fury could make him taller. "Keep your money, then. Keep your sad little life." He shoved me hard. I stumbled backward. The corner of the table hit the back of my head, a heavy, hollow thud. The world spun. For a moment I heard nothing but the fading echo of trumpet and breath. I felt the blood run from my nose, warm against my skin, dripping onto the floor. One drop, then another. Outside, the sunlight burned orange, filling the room with a cruel kind of beauty. Ethan turned away. He slammed the door so hard that Elaine's photo on the wall tilted sideways. Madison stood frozen for a heartbeat, eyes wide with shock. She whispered, voice breaking, I'm sorry, Mr. Barnes." Then she was gone too. I stayed on the floor. No yelling, no tears. Just the sound of my heartbeat, slow, heavy, deliberate, like the last beat of a drum that knows the song is over. I don't know how long I lay there. Minutes, maybe. Or maybe time just stopped caring. When I finally opened my eyes, the sun had set. The room was dim paint peeling off the ceiling like the years I'd let slip away. I whispered to the silence, Elaine. The song's reached its breaking point. Maybe it's time to play it again. I pushed myself up, hands trembling, blood smearing across my cheek. On the piano, a single drop of blood had landed on the F key. I didn't wipe it off. I let it stay a new note. A truth written in red. Because every new song begins with silence. And this one, will end with justice. I used to believe music could hold people together, that a beautiful melody played on time and with heart could mend whatever was breaking between them. But I learned something the hard way when people stop listening. Music becomes nothing but noise. I met Elaine in the summer of 1988, in a dim little jazz bar on Frenchman Street, New Orleans. I was a young saxophone player chasing late nights and half-empty tips. She was a lounge singer with a voice like warm whiskey and eyes that could make you forget how long the night had been. I remember that night clearly. I had just finished playing Blue in Green. She walked up to me, set her wine glass on the amplifier, and said, "You play like you're talking to someone who left you." I smiled. Maybe I'm talking to someone who never showed up. We laughed, and just like that, two out-of-tune notes found the same melody. We married in 1990 and moved to Nashville. Together we opened a tiny music studio on the South Side. Elaine taught piano. I taught drums and saxophone. It was barely the size of a garage, but every afternoon it filled with the laughter of kids and the sound of jazz riffs clashing with old country tunes. That little room smelling of wood polish and dreams was the heartbeat of our lives. Then, in 1993, Ethan was born. A boy who carried rhythm in his bones. Every time he heard music, his hands would drum along the table in perfect time. Elaine would watch him and smile. Be grateful for your father, Ethan. No one teaches patience better than he does. I used to laugh at that. I had taught hundreds of kids to keep rhythm, but only with Ethan did I teach from my heart. At night I'd sit him on the piano bench beside me, let his small fingers press the keys, and together we'd play Autumn Leaves. That song became our lullaby. And later, my heartbreak. When the recession hit in 2007, our studio had to close. I took a teaching job at the local high school. Elaine kept singing, though her voice began to fade. She told me it was just exhaustion, but the truth was darker. Her lungs were failing. By the time the hospital called, the cancer had already spread. I was too late. In that sterile white room under a cold fluorescent light, she held my hand and smiled, faint, but sure. Don't let the music die, Cliff. And don't let Ethan forget how to love. I nodded. That was the first promise I ever made to her, and the last one I ever kept. Elaine passed in 2016. Ethan was 23. He didn't cry. He just stood at the edge of the grave, eyes, hollow hands, still. I thought it was strength, but it wasn't. It was denial. Within 3 months, he moved out downtown, sharing an apartment with college friends. When I cleaned his old room, I found his drum set covered in dust, one stick snapped in half. On the desk lay a note scribbled in anger, "I'm done with music. It never takes me anywhere." I folded that note and placed it in Elaine's piano case like a scar I couldn't heal. I sold the old studio, and every dollar along with Elaine's life insurance payout went into her memorial fund, $210,000. It was hers, and it became my vow. I lived quietly, taught a few neighborhood kids, ate instant noodles when the pension ran thin. It didn't matter, as long as Ethan was safe, and I never betrayed her memory. People always think they have time to say, "I love you" to their parents, until time runs out, and the silence becomes heavier than regret. The last time Ethan and I played together was at his high school's jazz night in 2010. He was 17. I was invited to play saxophone. He was on drums. I remember the lights, warm gold, spilling over the stage, the room packed. For a moment, watching him, I thought, this is it. This is the future Elaine wanted for him. We started take 5. The rhythm tricky 5/4 time, but Ethan handled it beautifully at first. Then somewhere in the middle of his solo, he stopped. Just froze. His eyes went blank, sweat running down his face. He dropped the sticks and walked off stage mid-song. The crowd clapped anyway, thinking it was part of the show. But I kept playing, choking back the ache in my throat, each note heavier than the last. When the final tone faded, the audience stayed silent. They thought it was an artistic choice. But I knew that was the sound of a bond breaking. After that night, Ethan never touched a drum again. He barely looked at me. Our conversations grew shorter, then quieter, then nothing at all. Years later, looking back, I realized that night was the turning point. I thought I'd taught him rhythm, how to keep time, how to rise after mistakes. But I forgot something vital. Sometimes people don't need to learn how to play, right? They need to learn how to listen when they play wrong. My voice still cracks when I talk about that memory. I can still see Elaine's eyes, the way she'd rest her hand on my shoulder after every show and say, "You always know how to end a song at the right moment." But I didn't know how to end the one between me and my son. So I waited. For years, I waited for him to come home, for the door to open, for that familiar sound of footsteps in the hall. But what came back was a fist. Tonight I sit at the old piano. Elaine's photo smiles at me through a thin layer of dust. The house still hums faintly with the echoes of music, but only I can hear it. For Ethan, music died with his mother. For me, it became the only way to keep breathing. I am still alive, living inside a song that never got finished, and a promise that never faded. That night I dreamed again. The old stage, the warm lights, the sound of drums slightly offbeat. I turned my head. Ethan was there, his hands hanging at his sides, eyes cold, distant. The lights dimmed. My saxophone choked on its last note, and through the darkness I heard Elaine's voice. "Cliff, if he loses the rhythm, teach him to play again. Don't stay silent." I woke up drenched in sweat. Outside, the wind brushed against the first fallen leaves of the season. Nashville was quiet, the kind of quiet that asks for courage. I understood then my promise wasn't over. The song wasn't finished. And this time, I wouldn't let anyone play it out of tune. Some mornings people wake up to sunlight on the curtains, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, and the sound of birds reminding them they're still alive. But I woke up to silence. No music, no birds, no voice, just a sterile white light, and the steady beep beep of a heart monitor, cold and merciless, like a broken metronome. I tried to listen, but all I heard was nothing. My left ear heavy muffled as if someone had poured fear inside it. I lived my entire life inside sound, and in one single afternoon I lost it. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling above me was blinding white, the fluorescent light flickering like it was gasping for air. My arm was hooked to an IV. My hands trembled. The room smelled of antiseptic and iron like rusted instruments in a forgotten orchestra pit. Then I heard a voice, soft, shaky, full of relief. "You're awake. Thank God." I turned my head slowly. Betty Coleman sat beside me, my neighbor, 67, a widow who lived 2 houses down. Her eyes were red, her hands gripping mine tightly. "I called the ambulance," she said. "Your door was open. I heard something fall. And when I went in, you were on the floor, bleeding." I tried to smile. "Thank you, Betty. I must have just fallen." She shook her head sharply. "No, Cliff. I saw your son leaving. His face was red, and his hands were bloody." The words hit harder than any punch. A cold shiver ran through me. Each syllable landed like the thump of a muted bass drum sounds I could no longer truly hear, but somehow still felt. An hour later, the door opened again. A woman stepped in, leather jacket, badge glinting in the light. Mid-40s, calm eyes, steady posture. Detective Sarah Coleman. No relation to Betty, though I knew her name from another life. She'd been a regular at the St. John Church Jazz Nights years ago. She pulled a small notepad from her jacket, sat down beside the bed, and spoke evenly, the kind of tone people use when they've seen too much pain to flinch anymore. "Mr. Clifford Barnes," she said, "can you tell me what happened yesterday?" Her pen hovered above the page. I stared at it. It looked heavier than a weapon. "I fell," I murmured. "It was just an accident." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "An accident," she repeated softly. "You fell hard enough to break your nose and split your forehead." I didn't answer. Betty stood by the door, voice trembling. "I told you, Detective, I saw his son." He shouted at him. "I heard glass breaking." Sarah exhaled slowly, not in anger, but in quiet exhaustion. Then she turned to me, her voice steady but filled with weight. "Mr. Barnes, I know what this looks like. I've seen it too many times. Parents who stay silent thinking love means protecting the one who hurt them. But silence doesn't heal anything. It feeds the violence." She paused, eyes softening. I know that because I was one of those children. My father endured me for years, my rage, my defiance. When he died, I realized what I'd stolen from him. The room went quiet. Her words cut deeper than my wounds. There was no pity in her eyes, only understanding. She took out a small business card and placed it gently on the table beside me. If you change your mind, call me. No one should have to suffer alone, not even a man who's taught others how to listen. When she left, the room felt heavier. The air hummed. I looked at the card. Sarah Coleman, Detective Elder Abuse Unit, Nashville PD. 2 words stood out like a bruise. Elder abuse. I had spent my entire life teaching kids to stay out of trouble, to listen to rhythm, to respect silence, and now here I was, a victim of my own son. The doctor came in next, flipping through a chart. Mr. Barnes, he said, your left eardrum is partially damaged. You might regain hearing, or you might not. For now, avoid loud sounds. I laughed softly, a brittle sound that carried the taste of blood. Avoid loud sounds. Doctor, it's not noise I fear, it's the silence. That night, the hospital glowed in muted light. Betty had gone home. It was just me, the machines, and the slow pulse of a heart monitor, steady, unyielding like the last beat of my funny Valentine. Outside the window, the city lights blurred against the glass reflections, stretching like piano keys under rain. And in my mind, I could still hear the echoes of Ethan's rage, the glass breaking the door slamming, the sound of a bond shattering into dust. I spent my whole life teaching others how to hear a wrong note, I thought, but I never heard the dissonance growing inside my own home. Around midnight, a nurse came by to check on me. Do you need anything, Mr. Barnes? Just one thing, I said quietly. Don't turn off the light. I don't like the dark. She smiled, gently nodded, and walked away. The smell of rubbing alcohol lingered in her wake. I looked back at the business card. The lamplight caught the embossed letters, casting tiny reflections like sheet music, glowing faintly in the dark. Sarah Coleman. I touched the name with my fingertips. Cold. Solid. Like a door I wasn't ready to open, but one I knew I had to. In the distance, I heard a faint hum in my left ear. Not silence anymore, but a low, trembling vibration, like the pluck of a broken bass string still trying to resonate. Maybe it was an illusion, or maybe the prelude to something beginning. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, sound can be stolen, but memory cannot. And justice always finds its rhythm. Just before leaving for the night, Sarah returned to the doorway. Her voice was low, softer than the hum of the machines. Mr. Barnes, don't let anyone else write your final note. Then she was gone. I sat there holding her card in my trembling hand. The overhead light flickered its glow, reflecting off the faint bloodstain still dried on my wrist. I'm not afraid of pain, I whispered. I'm afraid of justice staying silent. The lights flickered once more, then dimmed. And in that half-dark, half-light silence, the monitor's slow pulse echoed in my chest, steady, deep, and heartbreakingly alive. The warning was clear. This symphony wasn't over. It had only just begun. When I left the hospital, Nashville felt colder than usual, as if winter had arrived early. A soft drizzle fell over the streets, each drop tapping the pavement like the slow drag of a mop across an old wooden floor. I drove home in silence. The radio was broken, spitting nothing but static, a harsh reminder of the ringing in my left ear that refused to fade. When my house finally appeared through the rain, it looked darker than I remembered, empty, like the ghost of something that used to breathe. I pulled into the driveway. The front door was slightly open. The lock scratched. The wind slipped through the crack, carrying with it the smell of damp air and rust. The scent of a home once filled with music now violated by silence. Inside, the air was heavy. Every step echoed hollow brittle. The living room was chaos. Chairs pushed aside, cabinets forced open. Old papers, music contracts, lesson receipts, handwritten notes from Elaine scattered across the floor like torn feathers. I knelt down, gathering them one by one. My hands trembled. The room smelled of rain and dust, and in the corner my half-finished glass of water still sat on the table. The ice long melted, the liquid cloudy like memory diluted by time. And then I saw it. Our wedding photo, mine and Elaine's, the one that used to sit framed above the piano. Now it lay face down in the trash bin, edges soaked with dirt. The oak frame dismantled. The glass shattered into cruel, glittering shards. Beneath it was the small practice piano I once used to teach Ethan his first chords. The wood was cracked, one key broken in half. I stood still. Couldn't speak. Could barely breathe. My own voice whispered inside my head, low and distant. He didn't just hit me. He struck at his own memories. It took me nearly an hour to clean the room, to gather the fallen pages, to put the furniture back in place. But some things couldn't be fixed, like a broken key or a torn photograph. Every time I bent down, the wound at the back of my head throbbed, but I didn't stop. Finally, I sat down in the wooden chair by the window and opened my old laptop. The screen flickered blue, lighting my face with a tired glow. I logged into my bank account. The $210,000 memorial fund for Elaine was still untouched. But one of my old business accounts, a secondary fund I once used to maintain our music studio, had been drained. $10,000. Withdrawn 2 days ago. The name flashed on the screen, E. Barnes. I clicked on Details. And there it was, the final insult. Signature verified C. Barnes. A forged signature. Perfect enough to pass the system. But not perfect enough to fool me. I knew my own handwriting. My C always looped wide and smooth. This one was jagged, rushed, violent, like the way Ethan had learned to live. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The wind outside moaned through the cracked door, a hollow sound like someone trying to sing but running out of breath. "So this is how far you've fallen, Ethan," I whispered. Then came 3 knocks on the door. Short, steady. I knew that rhythm. Sarah Coleman. She stepped inside her raincoat, still dripping, followed by a man in a gray suit, salt and pepper hair glasses with black frames. "Mr. Barnes," she said, "this is Mark Jacobs, a financial attorney. He's handled a lot of elder fraud and signature forgery cases." Mark shook my hand, firm, calm, professional. "Detective Coleman told me about your situation," he said. "Would you mind if I take a look at your accounts?" I nodded and turned the laptop toward him. He scrolled quickly through the statements, his eyes sharp, the eyes of a man who'd seen too many crimes dressed in politeness. After a minute, he looked up. "Mr. Barnes, this isn't a system glitch. Someone with your personal information accessed your funds," I asked quietly. "You mean identity theft," he said. "They forged your digital credentials, and based on the transaction trail, I'd say it's someone close to you." The room froze. Sarah's reflection appeared in the window, her face calm, her eyes full of unspoken understanding. I looked toward the cracked piano. The broken keys reflected my own distorted face. I thought silence would keep the peace, I said softly. But music never stays quiet when a note is wrong. Mark closed the laptop and placed a hand on my shoulder. I can file a formal report, he said. But if it's your son, this will become public. Are you ready for that? I didn't answer right away. Outside, thunder rolled deep and distant, like the echo of Ethan's childhood drums. For a brief moment I saw him again, 10 years old, beaming with pride when he played his first clean rhythm. That rhythm was gone now, turned into the beating heart of greed. I exhaled slow and steady. Do what you need to do, I said. I've spent my life teaching others to stay in time. Maybe it's time I fought for the truth, even if it plays out of tune. Mark nodded, pulled a file from his case, and began to write. Sarah spoke softly, standing near the door. Mr. Barnes, when justice falls silent, someone has to make it listen. I looked around the wrecked room, the shattered frame, the broken instrument, the pieces of a life once filled with harmony. I bent down, picked up Elaine's photo, wiped the dirt away, and set it gently on the table. A piece of glass sliced my finger. Blood welled up, bright red alive, dripping onto the wooden frame. I didn't wipe it off. Outside, thunder cracked again. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room like a stage from a long-forgotten concert. "You hit me, Ethan," I whispered. "But from now on, every note I play will hit back with the truth." I sat down at the broken piano, pressed one key. The sound was dry, warped, imperfect, but still alive. I nodded. The new song had begun. Some songs aren't meant to be heard. They're meant to remind us how much truth we can still listen to. 3 days after Mark filed the complaint with the bank detective Sarah Coleman returned to my house. She carried a small black pouch and set it on the table. Inside was a tiny recording device, barely larger than a matchbox. "Mr. Barnes," she said softly, "this may sound strange, but I want your music to bear witness." I frowned. "You mean what?" She smiled faintly. "Hide it inside the piano. If Ethan comes back, it will capture everything. The police only need evidence. I picked it up, cold, metallic, almost weightless. You want me to turn the piano into a witness? No," she said. "I want you to turn your music into one." That night, I removed the piano's upper panel and placed the recorder in the hollow space between the D and E keys. I pressed one note, a dry, crooked sound, just enough vibration to trigger the mic. The piano became a silent guard of justice, faithful, patient, and waiting. I sat there for a while, staring at my hands resting on the keys. One trembled. The other felt numb. I remembered what Elaine once said, music never lies. Only people do when they play it. I pressed a C major chord. The sound was faint, imperfect, but alive. The piano would speak for me now. Around midnight, the phone rang. The name on the screen made my chest tighten. Ethan Barnes. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. His voice came through hoarse, uneven, carrying the smell of alcohol through the receiver. "Dad, I need to talk." I stayed quiet for a few seconds. "I'm listening. I need money. If you don't help me, I'll lose everything. I owe people. They're coming after me. You owe me this, Dad." My voice stayed calm, almost detached. "No, Ethan. I don't owe you anything. You owe yourself a little decency." There was silence. Then came his bitter laugh, dry, hollow, cruel. "Decency doesn't pay bills, Dad. You spent your life preaching morals, but you don't know a damn thing about the real world." I heard the flick of a lighter, the inhale of a cigarette. "You think I don't know?" he said, voice lowering. "You've got money more than any washed-up retiree I know. You just don't want to share." I stayed still, tone steady, the same voice I once used to teach my students. "Do you know why people write jazz, Ethan? Because it's the art of turning chaos into order, and you're doing the opposite, turning order into chaos." He paused. Then coldly, "You'll regret this, old man. I swear you will." Click. Silence. I didn't move. Outside, the rain fell harder, its rhythm fading into the wind. On the piano, a small red light blinked. The piano had heard everything. Sarah and Mark arrived the next morning. I opened the piano and handed them the device. Mark plugged it into his laptop. Static, then. Ethan's voice, rough, desperate, echoing through the speakers. "You owe me this. You've got money, and you're hiding it." When it ended, the room was silent. Sarah stared at the screen, her eyes soft but heavy. "Mr. Barnes," she said quietly, "this is enough to press charges. But if you want, we can take it further, open a full financial investigation." I looked at the waveform on the monitor, a jagged heartbeat fading across the screen. "Do it," I said. "Because this isn't about money anymore. It's about the truth." That afternoon, Mark stayed behind. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, casting lines across the cracked paint on the wall, like the veins of an aging hand. He asked carefully, "Mr. Barnes, does anyone else have access to your finances? Maybe an insurance policy from your wife, perhaps?" I nodded. Elaine had one. A life insurance policy from when she taught. I've never touched it. Mark walked to the corner cabinet and gestured toward it. "May I?" I unlocked it and pulled out an old folder, its edges yellowed with age dust clinging to the corners. Elaine's handwriting still graced the front policy, life insurance, May 2012. I opened it carefully, flipping through the brittle pages. Then my fingers froze. On the third page, beneficiary Ethan Barnes. The air vanished from the room. All sound faded, replaced by the deep thrum in my damaged ear, louder than ever. Mark noticed my face pale. "What is it?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just stared at Elaine's handwriting, gentle, graceful now, cutting like a knife. My voice came out as a rasp. I handed the blade to the one willing to use it. I stepped outside. The late afternoon light stretched long and thin across the yard, golden like an old bruise. The air smelled of rain and earth. From somewhere far away, the church bells rang. In my mind, Ethan's words echoed, "You'll regret this." Maybe he was right, but not for the reason he thought. I went back inside, opened the piano again, and looked down at the worn keys. The E key still bore a faint red streak, my own blood from the day the glass cut me. I rested my fingertip on it. "Elaine," I whispered. "I'm sorry. I never knew kindness could become a weapon." The note rang out low, tired, fading. Not music, just clarity. That evening the phone rang again. Sarah's voice, urgent, steady. "Mr. Barnes, we verified the insurance policy. It's still active. Ethan is the sole beneficiary." I stood by the window, watching my reflection against the glass. Outside Nashville glowed the city alive with lights like an orchestra tuning for a performance it didn't know was coming. "Then it's time," I said slowly. "Time to rewrite this composition. Not with notes, but with truth." The neon reflection split my face in half, one side bright, one side dark. That's who I was now, half mercy, half justice. And for the first time in years, I knew I would never be silent again. They say darkness has no sound, but if you listen closely, you can hear it, the faint whispers of those trying to bury their own sins. It's not a sound that comes from the throat, but from fear. 3 days after the recording, Nashville fell under a long, cold rain. I sat by the window holding a cup of coffee, gone cold, watching raindrops trail down the glass like tiny notes dissolving into silence. The ringing in my left ear hadn't stopped. It hummed constantly, a ghostly tone that reminded me something unfinished was still waiting to be resolved. The phone buzzed. Sarah Coleman. "Mr. Barnes," she said, voice clipped sharper than usual. "We found something." Her tone wasn't calm this time, it carried steel. "Ethan's been in contact with someone named Tony Russo, manager of an underground casino in Cleveland. Russo was arrested last week for money laundering. During interrogation, he talked." She took a breath. "He said, the kid told me his dad's got money. All I have to do is make him sign." I didn't respond. But my heartbeat slowed, each thud heavy dark like a muted bass note echoing through a cold room. Sarah continued Mark's forwarding all the files to the Davidson County Police. "We have text messages. Russo admitted Ethan paid him $2,500 to arrange the financial paperwork." I closed my eyes. Each word she spoke cut deeper than the last, a blade carving through memory. Part of me wanted to believe Ethan was manipulated, but the other part, the part that had seen the cold look in his eyes that day, knew this was his choice. I set the phone down and leaned back. Outside, the rain streaked across the glass in crooked lines. Inside, I could almost hear Elaine's voice again, her favorite melody, Autumn Leaves. "Only when you're silent," she used to say, "do you hear the truest part of someone." I was listening now. And beneath Ethan's voice, I could finally hear it, the pure sound of greed. That afternoon, Mark Jacobs arrived. He carried a folder damp from the rain. "Russo's confessed," he said. "The texts are in his phone. Ethan was planning to force you to sign over the memorial account." I looked at him, my voice low but steady. "What do I do now?" "Wait," Mark said, "and prepare because your son isn't finished." I gave a tired smile. "Mark, I've played music all my life. I know when a piece is building to its climax. And this one isn't there yet." That night I couldn't sleep. The rain came harder, drumming on the tin roof, offbeat, chaotic, like a drummer who'd lost his rhythm. I got up, walked through the house slowly. When I reached the piano, something caught my eye, a dark streak trailing from the back door to the corner of the room. I bent down. My fingers touched something rough, dry, and sticky against the wood floor. Blood. Not mine. Cold. Coagulated. Metallic. The smell was unmistakable, the scent of someone who'd come back to reclaim what they hadn't yet stolen. The back door lock was scratched again. A muddy footprint stained the rug. Only one person had a spare key. Ethan. He'd been here. Not to apologize, but to take what was left. The next morning, Sarah arrived with a forensic team. She scanned the room, eyes narrowing. "You didn't touch anything, no," I said quietly. "I know the value of truth better than anyone." The technician took samples, sealed them carefully in plastic. Sarah glanced back at me. "If it's Ethan's blood," she said, "we can charge him with unlawful entry, maybe even attempted elder assault. Do you want me to move forward?" I looked toward the window. Weak sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting diagonal lines on the wall, like a staff of music waiting for its final note. "Do it," I said. "This composition deserves to be finished. No song should stop halfway." She hesitated for a moment. "Mr. Barnes, do you ever think about forgiveness?" I smiled faintly, still facing the window. "You're asking the wrong man. I'm not seeking justice for revenge. I just want the wrong notes to play in the right rhythm." By late afternoon, the house was quiet again. I sat before the piano, lifting the lid slowly. The light fell across the black and white keys, two sides of the same truth. I pressed F. The sound came out sharp dry. Then the recorder hidden beneath the keys blinked red and came to life. A voice filled the room, Ethan's voice. "If you don't sign it, you'll regret it." I closed my eyes. Every word was another punch, but this time I didn't flinch. I looked at the red light flashing steadily. "Thank you, son," I whispered. "You just gave me a song that proves your guilt." I removed the memory card, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote carefully, "Evidence number 2. Recorded confession. E. Barnes." I sealed it, signed my name, and placed it beside Mark's growing pile of files. A gust of wind came through the door, lifting a page from the desk. Its flutter sounded like the turning of an old sheet of music. I sat there, hands resting on the cold surface of the piano. The rain had stopped outside, but inside me the storm was just beginning. The hallway light flickered. The room stood half lit, half in shadow, half in truth. In the mirror across the room, I saw my reflection, an old man scarred but no longer tired. "Justice doesn't sound like a hammer," I whispered. "It starts with a single note, quiet, trembling, and once it's played, it never stops echoing." I pressed another key, G, higher, brighter. The note rang out, lingering in the damp air. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I heard myself again, not as a father who endured, but as a man who had finally found the rhythm of justice. And somewhere in that silence, I could almost hear Elaine's voice, soft, distant play on Cliff. "Don't stop halfway," I smiled. My fingers touched the keys once more. Another note rose clear, pure. The beginning of retribution. They say the biggest storms don't start with thunder. They start with a phone call in the quiet hours of the night. That night, the rain was fine, as thread the wind curling softly around the porch. I sat at the table, fingertips resting on the piano, listening to the faint creak of old wood beneath my touch. Then the phone rang. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't expected, Madison. Her voice trembled, worn, as if she had been crying for hours. "Mr. Cliff, I'm sorry to bother you, but I didn't know who else to call." "Go ahead," I said quietly. There was a pause, a breath that sounded like breaking. "Ethan lied," she whispered. "About everything." She inhaled sharply, voice shaking. "He owes Tony Russo more than I thought. And worse, he took your Buick's registration papers. He tried to get it appraised, said he needed to sell it before the wedding." I said nothing, just stared out the window. The rain was heavier now, each drop hitting the roof like slow, deliberate drumbeats. "I found the pawn agreement in his drawer," she continued, voice cracking. When I confronted him, he snapped. He shouted, "What do you know about that old man? He's got money but never shares it." Her voice broke into sobs. "I can't do it, Mr. Cliff. I can't marry someone like that." I stayed silent for a moment, then spoke softly. "You don't have to apologize for the truth, Madison. But if you really want peace, sometimes you have to face it, even when it's colder than the rain." There was a long silence. Then she whispered, "The wedding's still on this Sunday. Both families are already here. I'd like you to come. Not for him, but because I want this to end, quietly." I nodded, though she couldn't see it. "Thank you," I said. "I'll come. Not for the ceremony, but because the truth deserves to be in the room." The next morning, I went to the bank. My hand trembled slightly as I signed the printed statement for Elaine's memorial account, $210,000. That number sat there cold and still, like the heart of someone long gone silent, but still beating. I folded the paper carefully, slipped it into a gold envelope, and sealed it. Not as a gift, but as a promise from a father keeping his last vow. Before I left, the teller looked up and smiled. "Mr. Barnes, this account's been untouched since 2016. I nodded. "That's rare," she said. "You must be very loyal." I gave a faint smile. "Not loyal," I said, "just not ready to betray the dead." By late afternoon, the rain had stopped, but the Nashville sky hung gray and heavy like tarnished silver. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights shimmer against the wet pavement. The house was too quiet. Then through the window I saw a figure. Tall, black coat. Hood pulled low. He walked slowly along the fence, something metallic glinting in his hand as he passed beneath the porch light. I didn't need 2 seconds to know. Ethan. He moved to the back door and tested the lock. Click, click. Then he looked up straight into the doorbell camera. His eyes weren't angry anymore, not ashamed either. Just calculating. He stood there a moment, then walked away, his shape dissolving into the dark like a wrong note fading off the staff. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Just watched him disappear. The next morning, Sarah arrived early uniform, still damp from the rain, the smell of coffee clinging to her. I showed her the video. She watched it once, then again, in slow motion, pausing on the frame where Ethan stared into the camera. "He knew it was there," she murmured. "That's not fear. That's intimidation." She looked at me. "Do you still have the envelope?" I nodded, pulled it from the drawer, and set it on the desk. Her gaze lingered on me, measuring perhaps the steadiness of a father who'd already been broken once, but refused to fall again. "Ethan didn't come to make peace," she said. "He came to see if you'd flinch." I met her eyes. "I once told him jazz doesn't allow fear," I said quietly. "When you play, you keep the rhythm even when the audience turns away." Sarah smiled, faintly, sadness flickering behind it. "Then keep the rhythm, Mr. Barnes. Go to the wedding. Let justice play its own tune." That night I sat beside the piano again. The lamp cast a golden pool of light across the cracked wood. The grain looked like scars, lines carved by time and memory. I opened the lid. The small red light still blinked under the keys, the recorder waiting faithful. I placed the envelope beside it and stared for a long moment. No one knew what was inside. Not just a bank statement, but a sealed verdict. Tomorrow, I whispered, the song will play its final note. Elaine. I pressed the F key, the one stained with my own blood. The sound came out low, dry, heavy. In that sound I heard calm, the kind that comes right before a storm breaks. Morning came gray and wind-bitten. No rain, just cold air sharp enough to cut the skin. I put on my black suit, silver tie, gray coat. The envelope fit perfectly in my hand. In the mirror, a man looked back at me, eyes deep, still, and calm, a performer ready for his last stage. Before leaving, I paused beside Elaine's photograph. "I've kept your promise for 9 years," I said softly. "But this time, I'm not just keeping it, I'm finishing it, in your way." That evening my phone buzzed. A message from Sarah Camera confirms fingerprint match Ethan's. "We have a surveillance order in place. Go to the wedding, Cliff. Don't change a thing. Let justice find its own rhythm." I set the phone down. Outside, the sky had turned black. Wind howled through the chimney. Thunder rolled, distant, hungry. The storm was coming in every sense of the word. I looked at my reflection in the window, half in shadow, half in light. An old man preparing to step onto the final stage of his life. Tomorrow, I whispered, my son will stand at the altar dressed in his finest, smiling for the world. But when the song of justice begins to play, he won't be the groom anymore. He'll be the one who finally hears the melody he composed himself. Outside, thunder cracked. The wind tore through the curtains. The house shuddered as if all of Nashville were holding its breath, waiting for the storm's first note to fall. Some songs don't end with a soft note. They end with the sound of breaking glass echoing through a room full of people pretending to be happy. Sunday morning. Franklin was wrapped in a pale mist, and the sunlight filtered weakly through rows of golden maples. I drove toward the small white chapel where the wedding was being held, its steeple tall, its bells tolling like a metronome for the last performance of my life. In my jacket pocket rested the golden envelope, the bank statement from Elaine's memorial account. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like I was carrying the weight of an entire memory. Inside, everything shimmered perfect, polished, almost unreal. White ribbons hung from the ceiling, roses lined the aisle, and a small band played "Can't Help Falling in Love," Elaine's favorite song. When I entered, heads turned. A few looked away. Some looked with pity. Others with discomfort. Ethan stood at the altar, flawless in his black suit, a smile carved onto his face that never reached his eyes. Beside him, Madison trembled slightly, hands clutching her bouquet too tightly. When she saw me, she nodded a faint, grateful nod. Ethan only glanced over, then turned away, as if I were just a smudge on the perfect picture he'd painted for himself. The ceremony began. The priest spoke his blessings. The soft background music flowed like a rehearsed heartbeat. I sat in the last pew, hand on the envelope, feeling each word of the sermon, as if it were being weighed in time signatures. When it was over, guests were invited to the reception hall next door, a room glittering with chandeliers and champagne light. I walked slowly, watching reflections of crystal lamps shimmer on the marble floor, like shards of glass waiting for the fall. Madison approached, smiling faintly. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Cliff. I really appreciate it." I nodded. "Good luck, Madison. Even a single wrong note can ruin a whole song." She smiled sadly, hand pressed against her chest, as if her heart already knew the melody was about to change key. Ethan joined us, voice cold and casual. "You came after all. Didn't think you had the guts, old man." I looked at him calmly. "You're mistaken, son. I didn't come for you. I came for Elaine." He paused, then gave a short, hollow laugh. "Don't tell me you brought a wedding gift." I nodded, slightly took the golden envelope from my coat, and placed it on the gift table. "It's from your mother," I said quietly. "I'm just returning what she left behind." The reception began. Music, laughter, glasses clinking, the soundscape of false joy. Then, while Ethan lifted his champagne, Madison opened the envelope. She smiled at first, then froze. Her eyes widened at the printed words, "Elaine Memorial Account Balance, $210,000. The color drained from her face. She looked at Ethan. "Ethan, what is this? You took money from your mother's memorial account." The air shifted. The music dimmed. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Ethan forced a smile. "No, you're mistaken. My father did this. He's trying to humiliate me." But Madison's voice cut through the room, sharp, shaking. "You're lying. I saw the pawn papers. You forged his name, Ethan. You forged your own father's signature." Sweat formed on his temples. His fingers tightened around the glass until his knuckles turned white. "You don't know anything. He's just trying to ruin my life." Then a new voice from the doorway. Actually, a woman said your father's not the one who ruined anything. Grace Miller, branch manager of the bank, stepped into the room holding a file. Her tone was firm, clear, each word landing like a hammer. I was asked to attend today by attorney Mark Jacobs. I confirmed the signature on the June 15th withdrawal was forged. Silence fell. Ethan's face drained of color. No, that's impossible. You're mistaken. But Grace placed the file on the table, voice like stone. There's no mistake, Mr. Barnes. We've already submitted the report to the Davidson County Police. The crowd murmured. Good God. During his own wedding, he stole his mother's memorial fund to gamble. Ethan's face flushed red. He screamed, "Shut up, all of you!" Then he slammed his hand against the table. Glasses, shattered champagne spilled across the floor like silver blood under the chandelier light. Madison stumbled back, tears in her eyes. You told me she cried if your father died sooner, you'd get the money. You're sick. Ethan, you're sick. The room froze. The pianist's hands lifted from the keys. The music died mid-bar. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I stood at the back of the hall saying nothing, watching. The golden light caught on the broken glass, on the tears on the ruin. Guests stepped back, clearing space around Ethan, a man now trembling, his mask finally slipping. Then the door opened. Plainclothes officers entered Sarah at the front. She said nothing, just raised her badge. Ethan didn't resist. He couldn't. I walked slowly forward. Each step echoed softly like the slow beat of a lonely jazz rhythm. When I reached him, I spoke quietly, my voice steady, almost kind. You once said music couldn't feed anyone. But today, it fed the truth. Then I turned and walked away. Outside, the sky broke open. Rain poured down in thick sheets, beating against my shoulders, mixing with the scent of wet earth and crushed roses. I stood in the churchyard, lifting my face to the storm, letting it wash away the blood, the glass, the years of silence. Justice doesn't need a stage, I whispered. It doesn't need applause or witnesses. It only needs a single moment of stillness, to be heard by those who thought they'd never have to listen. I walked away from the noise behind me, away from the broken laughter, and spilled champagne. Behind me lay a ruined wedding and a song that had just reached its final note, the sound of shattered glass. Someone once said, justice is a song that needs no musician. It only needs time to play itself. That night, Franklin didn't sleep. Outside the chapel, red and blue lights flashed across the rain-soaked parking lot. Sirens echoed through the thunder, an encore to the chaos that had just unfolded. Ethan stood in handcuffs, head lowered, his black suit drenched like an actor leaving the stage after his final scene, the one where the mask finally breaks. Beside him, Madison knelt in her soaked wedding gown, makeup running down her face, her sobs lost in the downpour. Sarah stood near them, her police jacket dripping, voice steady, cold, and clear. Ethan Barnes, you are under arrest for elder abuse, identity theft, and federal financial fraud using your father's social security number to withdraw funds illegally. You have the right to remain silent. Ethan lifted his head, eyes wild. No, you don't understand. I just needed a chance, just a little, to start over. I wasn't hurting anyone. Sarah looked at him, not angry, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from hearing the same plea too many times. You hurt the only person who ever tried to save you. He struggled, but two officers held him tight. The cuffs locked with a dry, sharp click, short, final, like a wrong note cut off at the right moment. I stood under the chapel's overhang, rain still hitting my shoulders, cold as steel. No one looked at me. No one clapped. And that was exactly how it should be. Sarah approached. Her hair was soaked, her eyes red, but her voice was still taut, like a string tuned to the perfect pitch. "You did the right thing, Cliff," she said softly. "You didn't take revenge. You protected the next person, another father, another mother who might have been destroyed by their own child." I didn't answer. The ringing in my left ear started again, but this time, I didn't hate it. I just listened to the rhythm of the rain and the rhythm of my own heartbeat, slow, steady, calm. "I didn't win, Sarah," I said finally. "I just held on to what music taught me: never play offbeat, even when the audience boos." She smiled a tired smile, the kind of smile only people who've seen too much justice wear. Justice isn't always beautiful, Cliff, but it's always in tune, even if only you can hear it. The red lights from the patrol cars reflected in her eyes, and for a moment it looked like the old stage lights from my past. I nodded. "You're right," I said. "Some songs don't need applause. They just need someone brave enough to play the last note." They led Ethan into the car. The door slammed shut, a hollow, echoing thud that bounced off the wet stone walls. I watched him go. No anger, no pity, just a silence deep enough to understand that this wasn't the end. It was simply what remained after the music had finished. A young officer approached, holding the golden envelope I'd placed on the wedding table. "Mr. Barnes," he said quietly, "this was marked as evidence, but if you'd like, you can keep it." I took it from him, wiped the rain from the edges, and smiled faintly. "No need," I said. "It's already done its part." I dropped it into the trash can beside me, the paper-soaked, quickly edges turning dark like the last low note fading into silence. Hours later, I sat in an interview room at the Davidson County Police Station. Outside, the rain still whispered against the windows. Inside, the fluorescent light hummed. On the table, a recorder, a cup of cold coffee, and a signed statement. Mark was there too, his suit still damp, his voice gravelly. "Russo's being charged as well," he said. "He confessed to everything. Ethan used your social security number to open a shadow credit account. We've got the statements, the confession, and the audio from your piano." I listened, didn't interrupt. When he finished, I asked quietly, "Did he say anything?" Mark hesitated, then looked down. "Just one thing," he said. "My father never loved me." I stared at the white wall opposite me, my shadow bent and distorted by the light. "He's wrong," I said softly. "Every father loves his son, but some sons strangle that love until it stops breathing." Sarah entered with a file in her hand. "You're free to go, Cliff," she said. "Ethan's being held overnight. Russo's transferring to federal custody tomorrow morning." I stood, buttoned my coat, and said quietly, "Then the performance is over." Sarah tilted her head. "No," she said. "Just intermission. Because people like you remind the world that honesty never plays out of tune." I chuckled softly. "Maybe you should learn the saxophone, Sarah. It teaches you how to breathe right even in silence." She laughed, a small, tired sound. Then we both fell quiet, listening to the rain tapping against the glass like distant applause for a concert no one had come to see. When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped. No thunder, no wind. Only the glow of yellow streetlights reflected on the wet pavement. I walked slowly, my shoes breaking the puddles into ripples, the last echoes of a song ending on time. No one spoke. No one saw me leave. But I knew. Somewhere, Elaine was listening. Justice doesn't need to be loud, I whispered. It only needs silence so those who once shouted can finally learn to hear. I walked away from the lights, leaving behind the smell of rain, of metal, and of a city that had just heard its first symphony of justice. Some songs aren't written in notes. They're written in scars, each one a rhythm of endurance. It took me 3 months after justice was served to understand one thing: dignity isn't something you win back. It's something you never let anyone take. Spring returned to Nashville. The sky was clear again. Sunlight spread softly across the old brick roofs, and every morning the bells of St. John's Church rang like a quiet reminder that even broken souls can start over. I began teaching music there for free. The room was small, white-painted walls, a window that opened to a grassy yard. The air smelled of wood polish, sheet music, and candle wax. At first, only a few came: a janitor's son, a widowed woman in her 50s, and a war veteran whose hands still shook from trauma. But week after week, the class grew. People came not to learn music, but to learn how to keep time with their own lives again. I called it second verse. Because every one of us deserves a second verse after the first one breaks. In the mornings, I stood by the same old piano, teaching the children about rhythm patience, and sometimes about a woman named Elaine, who once told me that music doesn't need an audience-only honesty. One afternoon, while I was helping a little girl play Autumn Leaves, Father Donovan the priest walked in smiling. He carried a folded copy of the Tennessee Chronicle. "Mr. Barnes," he said, "you'll want to see this." I wiped my hands and took the paper. Across the center in bold print was the headline, "The Sound of Dignity," the story of Clifford Barnes, the father who was beaten but never bowed. By Emily Rivera. The article told everything. The investigation, the trial, the arrest of Rousseau, and the quiet music classes I now taught at St. John's. At the end, I found a paragraph that made my hands tremble. Mr. Barnes doesn't speak of justice as a concept, but as a rhythm, where truth is the only pitch that cannot be faked. In silence, Clifford Barnes reminded an entire city what dignity sounds like. I folded the paper and set it beside the piano. Sunlight streamed through the window, touching the words, "The Sound of Dignity," and painting them gold like a memory of an old autumn that never really left. Later that day, the church mailman brought me an envelope. No name, no return address. Inside was a folded note, handwritten, shaky but strong. I was beaten by my own son, too. I stayed silent for 4 years because I was ashamed. But after reading your story, I realized silence isn't noble. It's complicity. Thank you for speaking out, for reminding people like me that dignity never dies. It just waits for someone brave enough to play it in tune again. I sat still for a long time, holding the letter, feeling my heartbeat steady and slow. Sometimes one voice from far away is enough to tell you, you've done the right thing. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside a small wooden box next to Elaine's old fountain pen. It belonged there like a bright note between 2 dark chords. One late afternoon, as the light slipped through the window, I heard a knock on the door. A familiar voice called softly, "Mr. Cliff, it's Madison." She stood outside, hair tied back, holding a folder of sheet music. Her eyes weren't afraid anymore. They were calm. "You needed help copying scores for your students," she said. "If you'll have me, I'd like to help." I smiled. "Music needs 2 hands," I said, "one to keep time and one to find the melody we've lost." That evening we sat by the piano together. She played the melody. I played the chords. The room filled with sound, Autumn Leaves, the same piece Elaine and I had played on a rainy night in 2009. When the song ended, Madison looked at me and whispered, "Do you ever think forgiveness is part of music too?" I paused, then answered slowly, "Yes. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Sometimes a musician just needs to know when to stop before the song turns into noise." She smiled, tears glistening. "Thank you, Cliff. If not for you, I'd never have known how to keep living after my own melody broke halfway through." After she left, I sat alone. The room was still. Only the window rattled softly with the wind. I opened an old drawer and took out a faded cassette tape. Elaine, Home Recording 2009. I placed it in the player. The tape hissed. Then her voice, warm, steady, filled the room. "If you're hearing this, I'm probably gone. Don't be sad, Cliff. Music isn't just what we play. It's knowing when to stop playing so the silence that follows can be beautiful." I closed my eyes. Her voice touched every vein of memory. I could almost see her smiling, resting her hand on my shoulder, saying, "Play softer, Cliff. Don't force the note to say what it doesn't want to say." I smiled faintly and whispered back, "You were right, Elaine. Music, like dignity, isn't won through noise. It's preserved through silence." I pressed one key on the piano. The sound was soft, clear, and then faded into the quiet. On the desk, the candle flickered its light, brushing against the newspaper headline, "The Sound of Dignity." "No one truly wins in stories like this," I said softly. "But if we still have our dignity, we still have music to play. And as long as the music remains, justice hasn't stopped singing." I looked out the church window. Nashville was bathed in violet dusk. Sunlight reflected off lingering raindrops. The air carried the scent of wood and lavender. Another chapter closed. No applause, no stage lights, only dignity humming softly as I sat listening until the last note disappeared into the wind. They say that when all sounds fade away, what remains in a person's heart is the melody of regret. I never believed that, not until that spring morning. It was April in Nashville. The sky was impossibly clear, and sunlight poured through the window, painting long amber streaks across the wooden floor. I was making coffee when I heard the mail truck pull up by the gate. Old Jim, the postman voice, still rough but warm, called out, "Mr. Cliff, you've got a letter from Davidson Prison." I stepped onto the porch. There it was, a wrinkled envelope, edges smudged with dust and dew, the handwriting crooked, pressed hard into the paper. From Ethan Barnes. Inmate, number 54267. I stood for a long while, not opening it. Something cold passed through me, half from the morning air, half from a memory that still hadn't closed. 10 months ago, that same hand had struck me down. Now, it was writing to me. Between those two moments was an entire lifetime. I took the envelope inside and sat by the window next to the old piano, where dust had gathered on the keys. I slit it open with a small knife. The sound of tearing paper was like reopening an old wound. The page smelled faintly of iron and damp, the scent of the prison locks mixed with morning coffee. The handwriting was uneven, the lines shaky, but every word was sharp, as if written in rhythm with a heartbeat. Dad, I heard your music on the prison radio. They played Autumn Leaves, the version you performed at St. John's. I recognized it immediately, and I regret everything. I stopped reading. My eyes fixed on that word, regret. The sound I had waited my whole life to hear, and yet it made me tired. You once told me jazz was truth, that a player can hit the wrong note but never play with a wrong heart. I forgot that. I thought I could bend the melody to my will until there was nothing left but the echo of guilt. The paper trembled in my hand. Every line sounded like a chord trying to find its way back to pitch. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know. Every night in here I listen to your music, and I've realized something. No wall is thick enough to block music, and no sentence is heavier than the silence of your own soul. At the bottom, a single line, darker, pressed harder than the rest. Dad, I'm sorry. I folded the letter and set it beside Elaine's music box. Old wood corners worn smooth, the words still engraved on its lid. For Cliff, keep playing. I opened it. The gears turned slowly, and autumn leaves began to play soft, tender, as if Elaine were standing right there, smiling, resting her hand on my shoulder. See Cliff, I could almost hear her say. Music never dies. It only waits for someone willing to listen. I closed my eyes, let the melody mix with my breathing, and in my mind, I saw Ethan again, a boy of 10 sitting by his toy drum, tapping offbeat, laughing as I corrected him. That laughter felt so far away now, like a broken recording from another life. That afternoon, I took the letter to the classroom at St. John's. The children were gone, and the room was quiet, except for the wind whispering through the window cracks. I read the letter again, slower this time. Each word a private conversation between two exhausted souls. I didn't know if Ethan's words were real, or if he was just trying to ease his guilt. But maybe that didn't matter. What mattered was that he had finally heard. He heard the truth in the music, and maybe for the first time, his own voice beneath the noise. That night rain began to fall again. The wind carried the smell of wet earth through the window. I sat by the piano, turned on the old radio. The local station was airing Stories Behind the Strings. The announcer's voice, low, feminine, steady, filled the room. You've just heard Autumn Leaves, performed by Nashville musician Clifford Barnes, a man who once said, "Justice has its own rhythm." We call this recording the sound of dignity. I smiled faintly. Her voice mingled with the sound of rain, like Elaine speaking through a stranger's tone. I didn't turn it off. I let it play. Midway through the broadcast, they aired a short clip, an old interview Emily Rivera had recorded with me weeks ago. They asked if I hate my son, I had said. I told them no. I only regret that he never understood dignity isn't found in an apology. It's found in the courage to face the note that hurts to hear. The music faded. Then the radio clicked off by itself. The room fell silent. I looked toward the music box. The lamp's reflection glowed faintly on its tarnished brass. I stood, took Ethan's letter, and placed it inside the box alongside Elaine's pen and that old newspaper with the headline, "The Sound of Dignity." I closed the lid. The tiny click echoed softly, clean, final, like a note struck perfectly in tune. Then I sat at the piano again, turned on the small desk light. The keys gleamed black and white under the gold glow. Outside, the rain fell steady. I pressed the C key. A round, clear tone filled the air, then melted into the wind. At that exact moment, the radio flickered back on by itself, replaying the final line of the broadcast. This recording was composed by Clifford Barnes, a man who believes justice has its own rhythm, and that music, when honest, can make the whole world listen. I sat still, eyes closed. The music blended with the rain with the silence, and in that silence I finally heard what I'd been searching for all my life, peace. No one can rewrite the past, I whispered. But as long as we keep listening, The future still has melody. I turned off the light, leaving the room to the faint silver of the rain. On the table, the music box trembled softly, and I could almost hear Elaine's voice, gentle, distant, singing the final duet between guilt and grace. Summer 2025. Nashville glows under the kind of sunlight that feels alive. No more rain, only that blinding brightness spilling over red brick roofs, as if the whole city was exhaling after a long, heavy storm. That morning, St. John's Church was busier than usual. On the chalkboard by the gate, in neat white letters, "Grand Opening, Elaine's Music Room." And just below it, a place where silence becomes music. I stood on the church steps, hat in hand. The small classroom inside, the one where I'd taught the children, had been transformed. On the wall hung a photo of Elaine, smiling, her hair caught in a gentle breeze. Beneath it, a bronze plaque read, "Elaine Barnes Memorial Music Fund, $210,000. That was every dollar I'd saved for 9 years, the same money Ethan once demanded for his wedding. Now it would become scholarships for children who couldn't afford music lessons. A fund not in my name, but in the name of the woman who once told me that dignity doesn't need an audience. Guests arrived one by one. Sarah in a deep blue suit, eyes steady still, the same woman who'd once stared down darkness and didn't blink. Betty Coleman, my elderly neighbor, in her floral dress holding a basket of homemade bread. Emily Rivera, the journalist, camera in hand, quietly capturing the moment. And Madison, in a simple white dress, standing near the front row, her smile soft, her eyes full of calm. No one spoke much. Some stories no longer need words, just a nod of understanding. When the ceremony began, Father Donovan stepped up to the pulpit. Today, he said, we're not just opening a room. We're rebuilding the sound of a soul, the sound of perseverance and forgiveness. He invited me to the stage. Applause followed, gentle, sincere. I sat before the old piano, the same one Ethan had cracked during the storm. The fracture was still there, running across the keys like an unhealed scar. But the instrument could still sing, if touched the right way. I took a deep breath and pressed the first note, A. Then began to play Autumn Leaves. People think justice is the sound of a gavel striking wood, I said quietly. But for me, justice is when the music still plays even after the hands have trembled in fear. Each note flowed slowly, imperfect, but honest. The melody filled the room, echoing off the walls, carrying into the stillness. Sarah bowed her head. Betty wiped her tears. Emily lowered her camera. Even Madison stood beside Elaine's photograph, the light catching half her face, so different, yet somehow familiar. And miles away, inside Davidson Prison, in a concrete room, washed with gray light, a radio crackled on the wall. It was broadcasting the performance live. No one spoke. A few inmates tapped their knees, trying to keep rhythm. In the corner sat Ethan Barnes, his hands clenched, eyes fixed on nothing. When the song reached its bridge, when the sound of that cracked key broke through the melody, his tears finally fell. Not because the music was beautiful, but because he understood. Each note was a forgiveness his father had never spoken aloud, but chose to speak through sound. Ethan bowed his head and whispered, "I hear you, Dad." I kept playing, unaware that my son was crying somewhere beyond those walls. I only knew that when I hit the final note, the ringing in my left ear, that endless hum, was still there. permanent. I had lost the sound in one ear, but in return, I could finally hear the rhythm of silence, the rhythm of forgiveness. Applause rose soft at first, then stronger. I bowed. "Thank you," I said. "This piano is cracked, but it still plays. Just like people we can break, but we don't have to go quiet." The room went still again. Madison stepped forward, placing a bouquet of lavender on the piano. "She'd be proud of you, Mr. Cliff," she whispered. I smiled. She always was the song I could never finish. When the guests left, the church grew quiet once more. I looked around the empty room, afternoon light spilling through stained glass painting red, purple, and blue patterns on the walls. It looked like someone was painting the sky with nothing but light. I whispered to the air, "I've lost sound in one ear, but I found the rhythm of forgiveness. Justice doesn't strike like a hammer. It plays softly like a song we no longer fear to hear." I walked off the stage and out to the front steps. The lavender scent drifted in the warm wind. I put on my old hat and walked slowly past the gate of St. John's Church, the place where every wound began and where it finally found its harmony. On the bench by the gate, Betty was waiting, smiling gently. "What do you think Elaine would say today?" she asked. I looked up at the golden sky and replied, "She'd probably say, 'You played in time, Cliff.'" We both smiled. The air was still. "Some wounds don't need to heal," I said softly. "They just need to become sound to remind us that even silence has a voice of its own. And before I leave you, if this story made you think about the silence of justice, share it. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Your words mean more than you think. Hit the like button if you believe that dignity still matters. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story where silence finally speaks. Because sometimes, one quiet voice is enough to make the whole world listen.